Hi everyone, welcome back to FET English Didactics. So today we're going to be looking at Learning Unit 1, Theme 1, Diversity. When you think of South Africa, one of the first things we almost always think about is diversity. And this is especially true in the classroom. When we walk into a classroom, we are walking into a very diverse situation. All of the children sitting in front of us are different. Now, when we think of diversity, one of the first things we tend to think of is race and culture, and that definitely is a part of diversity. But there are so many other things that make each learner diverse. So, as I say, not the main ones, the most obvious ones are race and culture, but you're also going to have learners who come from different religious backgrounds. You're going to have learners who come from different home lives. They're going to be different socioeconomic situations. You are also going to be dealing with learners who have different learning styles, different learning preferences. You are also going to be dealing with learners who are neurotypical and who are neurodivergent. So you are going to be dealing with learners who have things like ADHD and might need some sort of guidance from you on how to deal with that in the classroom. All of these things are actually a wonderful resource because a huge part of schooling is learning how different people are, how to work with different people, how to engage with different people. That is one of the soft skills of learning that is so important. So please don't look at diversity as something negative. It really isn't. It is something that really brings a whole new element to the classroom that we really should be embracing. So if we're looking at the definition, variety. So as we said, there are a whole lot of different ways in which this is going to manifest. And of course, one of the big ones that I actually didn't mention earlier is home languages. Now, you are teaching English FET phase home language. But just because this is a home language course does not mean that your learners are going to be home language speakers. You are going to have a lot of learners who are going to be second language English speakers or even third or fourth language speakers. Now, even within that, you're going to have diversity. You are going to have English second language speakers who speak English beautifully. They will speak English better than most of the English home language speakers. You're going to have learners who are English second language but really struggle because they haven't been exposed to English much. There are learners who are only exposed to English in the classroom, and that is going to present a very unique challenge. You're also going to have learners of different abilities in your classroom. And one of the big things that is very important in the South African context is to make sure that you are not assuming that your learner's ability is necessarily reflected in their language ability. Now, this obviously is a little bit more complex when we are dealing with the language subject, but you might have a learner who is in fact incredibly capable, but is struggling because of a language barrier. Whereas you might have another learner who doesn't have a language barrier, but is struggling to understand the work. The way you're going to approach these two is going to vary. So when you walk into a classroom, you need to be very aware that this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all exercise. Now, even if you walk into a classroom that looks pretty homogeneous, so a lot of the learners are the same ethnicity, the same race, a lot of them come from similar backgrounds, there is still going to be a huge diversity between them. They are going to have different family structures. They are going to have different views. They are going to have different preferences, different abilities. As I say, some of them might have neurodivergencies. And the best way to approach diversity is to embrace it. And hopefully, by the end of this phase of schooling, the learners will have learnt a lot about diversity, a lot about listening to and respecting other people's views, a lot about working with people who think and respond very differently to them. So one of the challenges as an educator is to learn how to embrace diversity and to encourage the learners to see diversity as a very good thing. Of course, diversity is challenging. So we do need to be very aware of diversity and we need to be aware of the challenges. And one of the first things that does have to be acknowledged is that this is never going to work perfectly. You are never going to be in a position where you are able to perfectly accommodate all the needs of every learner in every lesson. And that is not, it's not something that you should even try. There are lessons that are going to be better suited to certain learners, and that's absolutely fine. For example, if you are doing visual literacy, obviously the learners who are visual learners are going to enjoy that section more. Learners who do not read very well are not going to enjoy the reading lessons as much. That's fine. If you think back to most of our schooling, there wasn't a huge variety in the way teachers taught, and we all managed to get through. But if you want to really excel as a teacher, you are going to really consider the diversity in your classroom as well as evaluate how best to accommodate that for each specific lesson. As I say, you're not going to accommodate everything, every lesson, nor should you try, but you should be aware. And you should accommodate as much diversity as is reasonable in as many lessons as you can. So some of the ways in which diversity is going to have an impact in the classroom is, for example, not all learners will understand colloquialisms. So you have to be aware of the passages that you read, the way in which you speak. Are there going to be colloquial phrases that some learners are not going to understand? And it's the same thing with culturally specific examples. One of the easiest examples to use is that of Macbeth. Macbeth opens with 3 witches. Now, different cultures have different ideas of what witches are and what witchcraft means. So we are using, obviously, the 16th century English view of witches and witchcraft, but you have to understand that not all the learners are going to understand that example. So you're going to have to do some pre-reading activities to make sure that all of the culturally specific concepts that are going to be used in your lesson are explained beforehand. If you are, for example, teaching Dorian Gray, that obviously is set in a different country, in a different time period. There is going to be a lot that you are going to need to do in the pre-reading phase of your lesson to ensure all the learners in your class understand the cultural references. One of the very interesting things is that learners' reactions to literary texts will vary. So some of the things that you are expecting them to react to, they won't. And other things that you aren't expecting a reaction from, you will get a big reaction. And various learners are going to react differently to different sections. Some learners are going to, you give the learners a reading text. Some learners are going to think that there is nothing strange or nothing negative in this text, while other learners are going to read that same text and think that there is something very strange or very negative in the text. One of the practical ways that we have to acknowledge and accommodate this is, of course, when we are marking comprehension questions. So when we ask for their views, what we are actually assessing is their ability to reason and to make their views known. So we aren't necessarily marking them on whether they agree with what the author wrote or not. We are looking at their reasoning and evaluating the strength of their reasoning. Can be quite difficult sometimes if we have strong opinions ourselves, but as educators, it is our job to put aside our prejudices and our views and read and understand and listen to our learners' reactions from a place of neutrality. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, but we will be bringing diversity in the classroom into all our other themes and learning units as we go along. When we are looking at multimodality, for example, we're going to be talking a lot about diversity there. But in all of the themes and learning units to come, you need to consider how diversity will affect all of these things. So there are some questions for you to consider. What are the advantages of diversity in a classroom? And what are some of the ways in which you as a teacher can deal with diversity in the classroom? Now, that is a thinking question. It's a discussion question. I would like to remind you all that you don't necessarily need to have been in the classroom to have some really good ideas. This is a thought exercise for you. I promise you, each and every one of you will have some really good ideas of how diversity will work in a classroom. And I want to leave you with this: the difference between equality and equity, because this is the foundation of understanding diversity in the classroom, is we want to move from equality to equity. So if we treat everyone fairly, not everyone is receiving the same advantages. And this is something that is challenging to implement in a classroom, but is very important to try to implement as much as possible. So some learners don't need any advantages. They are perfectly capable and perfectly able to complete all the work to the necessary standard by themselves. Some learners need a little bit of help. They need a little bit of a boost, and some learners need a lot of help. And what we try to do through understanding diversity is we are trying to allow all the learners to have as similar an advantage in every lesson, in every section as possible. And as I say, that means some learners don't need extra time. They don't need a glossary. Some learners do. So when you are thinking about diversity in the classroom, the point is not to treat everyone exactly the same. The point is to try and meet all the learners where they are and get them all to the same place.